In tonight's Dorchester segment, we catch up on stories about recent and future elections, along with plans for new development and adaptations to climate change. To fill us in is the managing editor and publisher of the Dorchester Reporter, Bill Forry. Thank you very much for being with us, Bill.
Thanks, Chris. Good to see you.
Bill, I want to ask you about something I almost envied you for on Election Day, is that you were out early where there were lots of voters, some of them waiting in line. What was that like for you?
Sure, Chris. I voted myself at around 8:30 or 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning at Lower Mills Library, which earlier in the morning had a line down Richmond Street and around the corner to Dorchester Ave, down the business block there. And there were over 100 people in line, of course, spaced out. But other than that, it wasn't very different than a typical election day in my experience. Other than that, there weren't a phalanx of supporters outside, kind of trying to give last-minute instructions or exhortations to voters as they went in. None of that. I thought it was very orderly and very well run. And in Boston, there was none of the, I think, angst and anxiety really about, disruption at the polls, other than folks who feel, some degree of anxiety about being out at all and being around other people. That certainly is there. But the poll workers at Ward 17, Lower Mills Library were very, very helpful and moved things along quickly. It was pretty efficient. And the turnout, as we saw in Boston, was strong. However, as you know, Chris, it was lower than it was 4 years ago, slightly lower in terms of total turnout. And the results, however, were very predictable at the presidential level, with about 83.5% of city voters voting for the Biden-Harris ticket and about 15% voting for Donald Trump, which was a slightly higher percentage than Trump-Pence won in 2016.
And I think Biden-Harris did a little better than Clinton and her running mate did 4 years ago. So it's almost like the same thing all over again.
Yeah, that's true. There were some other candidates on the ballot in 2016 that shaved some percentage points off the Democratic ticket that year, probably. And, there was an enthusiasm gap in parts of Dorchester for sure in 2016 for Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden did better in some places than Clinton did, particularly in Neponset precincts like the Kenney School, where Trump came pretty close to winning in 2016, but didn't. Just to be clear, Trump-Pence did not win any precincts in the city or in Dorchester last Tuesday. But the closest they did come was at Florian Hall, which was anticipated. Biden won 511 votes and Trump won 487 votes. Significant support for the sitting president. And, that was not unusual, not unexpected. However, a sign of, kind of some division still in that part of Dorchester between sort of red and blue, I suppose.
Yeah. I want to ask you if you can possibly read anything as far as sentiment here, because you're out there on election day, and maybe people weren't exactly verbalizing it, and now 9 days later we have this, I wouldn't call it confusion really, but there is this game about who's going to be the next president. And then there's the reality of the votes. I mean, how is that playing in people's minds in Dorchester?
Well, I think, for the most part, given the results, there's a lot of relief among Bostonians who tend to vote Democrat and certainly for president. Well over 80% of Bostonians, I think it's fair to say, are very happy with the outcome that we finally heard on Saturday. That having been said, there's still anxiety. The Trump administration is not conceding or agreeing to a orderly transition at the moment, as we speak at least. That has all kinds of ramifications, and not the least of which may be involving our own mayoral race next year and the timing of decisions around that. So we can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like to, Chris.
Yes, because I want to ask you about that, because one of the other articles in your paper is taking a look at the mayoral race, and it might be hard to focus on it at this point, but there were two different lenses you can look at this through here, because you got the fact that Boston has never turned out a sitting mayor since James Michael Curran at the end of the 1940s. And on the other hand, we look at what Ayanna Pressley did to Capuano in Congress. So it looks as if, hey, maybe there's a possibility here, even if Marty Walsh wants to run for re-election.
Right. It could very well be a competitive election. It may be three candidates, maybe more. And as we write this week, so much of this does depend on whether Mayor Walsh does decide to run for re-election or to possibly take a position with the Biden-Harris administration, which is in play for the mayor potentially. There's much speculation attached to this, right? The mayor's name has been bandied about for everything from labor secretary to ambassador to Ireland, none of which is concrete, but could happen. Remember, Mayor Walsh was sworn in to his second term by then former Vice President Biden, now President-elect Biden, in 2017. They have a close relationship, and the mayor is well regarded, especially in labor circles, and would be a contender, is a contender for being tapped to be the Secretary of Labor. It's a big if, but if he were to be, and I have no inside knowledge of this, but I think it would be a strong likelihood that he might take that. And so then it's no longer a three-person race with Councillor Michelle Wu and Councillor Andrea Campbell already out. It's likely more candidates would emerge. And certainly the dynamics of even a two-person race there would be very different than what we're looking at now. To your point, no incumbent mayor of Boston has lost an election since 1949, when James Michael Curley was defeated by John B. Hines. That came, by the way, about 5 months or so after Curley had been released from prison. Very different situation. He was also someplace around 75 years old at the time, at the end of his career. So it's a very different city, obviously. But to your earlier point, Chris, yes, this would be a competitive election no matter what. All three present candidates, and of course the mayor has not formally declared his intention, but he has a large war chest of about $5.7 million. He's been raising money. He's been spending money in recent months. So gives every indication that he will run for re-election, unless, frankly, he's given an offer that he just can't refuse from President-elect Biden.
Well, it's not surprising that an incumbent mayor of Boston has a lot of money saved up in the campaign account. But on the other hand, what is a little unusual for me is that you have two major, well-known candidates running against him, announcing at such an early stage, and they are raising some money. But what do you say about the timing? Why is this happening so soon, you think?
Yeah, I think that there was some jockeying there among potential challengers, wanting to get out ahead of each other and get out ahead of other potential candidates who could emerge. A big factor in this is fundraising, and in order to raise sufficient funds, you have to get out on this side of the calendar year, the end of the calendar year, to be able to collect as much money as you can from donors before the end of 2020, and then tap them again at the beginning of 2021. So it's not unexpected that there would be competition for that now. I do think it's a little early, especially for voters, to be expected to be super engaged in this yet, particularly with this kind of still looming specter of, frankly, a constitutional crisis at the moment at the federal level.
Well, if it isn't one crisis, it's another. We still have these high figures for COVID testing positive rates in Dorchester, and now we have the T coming out with some service cuts. How much of that is going to affect Dorchester?
Well, all of us are going to be affected by the Mbta cuts as they're presently outlined, and they're not finalized yet. There's a series of public meetings that will be held online starting this week, really, and through the beginning of December. But we're talking about extensive cuts, including the end of weekend commuter rail service for most lines, ending at midnight on every day instead of at 1, ceasing all the ferry service, scrapping 25 bus routes. In Dorchester, the bus route that's kind of on the chopping block is the number 18, which runs between Andrew and Ashmont. That bus route would be eliminated under the current proposal. It does run parallel to the red line, so the T's argument is it's an important line, but there's redundancy there with the red line service. So that's a big one in Dorchester. The other thing is on the good front, a lot of our bus lines that are in existence now will survive. They would see less frequency. The Mattapan high-speed trolley, many people may have worried for that. That stays intact. They're just not going to have, frankly, as much frequency. So this is expected to save what they hope will be $130 million from what the T is spending next year. And this, by the way, all of this will go into effect next year. And it's really because of their massive shortfall, $579 million to date shortfall caused by the pandemic, the huge drop in ridership. It's something that has to happen. And I think most people understand that. The debate will be about which service lines and how to hopefully restore it in the future when things go back to somewhat normal.
I also want to ask you about some of the housing developments that are under consideration right now. There is one for the old Phillips Old Colony House location on Morrissey Boulevard, more than 200 units. I'm a little daunted here because I'm thinking this isn't right next to a T-stop. And do they have enough parking to make that work, or are people okay with that plan?
Well, the old Colony property on Marcy Boulevard, people may know it as Freeport Tavern. It's been closed for a few years. This proposal has been controversial more for the size and the height of it than for its proximity to the T. It's actually not really that close to an MBTA station because you have to really, it's kind of locked in there. You can get yourself to Fields Corner or other stops, but there really isn't a red line station there. So they do have 136 parking spaces included in this plan. And the pushback that we've heard most frequently is from folks who live in Port Norfolk or close by who feel like this is going to further wall off Dorchester from its waterfront. Of course, there's also the Southeast Expressway that's doing that work for us. I think this proposal probably will get further along and most likely will be approved with some changes to it. But a public meeting on that one is coming up on Thursday, 6 o'clock. And you can go to .news.com or to bostonplans.org to get more information on that one.
At the same time, the city is trying to do more to protect the Dorchester coastline from rising sea levels. And I know that has a lot to do with Morrissey Boulevard, but it's interesting, this plan, it's not just about safeguards, it's about more public access too. Can you explain how those two help each other?
It is. I mean, it's really it's the 174-page document that the city released last week. It's called Coastal Resilience Solutions for Dorchester. It's a summary really of all the plans that they've started to sketch out, looking all the way to 2070, Chris. So they know this is a very long-term solution, but there are some near-term things that have to happen. Morrissey Boulevard is already inundated regularly with high tides and storm events. Same with Clam Point, same with Port Norfolk, and increasingly Neponset Circle. This is going to continue. So they want some near-term solutions and some longer-term ones. But to your point, places like Moakley Park, it's in South Boston, but it's right at the doorstep of Dorchester and is heavily used by Dorchester people. Moakley factors majorly into this plan. They want to basically transform Moakley into not only a park, but a buffer and a barrier to the sea, creating a huge berm along Day Boulevard to protect from water inundating South Boston and Dorchester. They're doing something similar throughout to create berms along the waterfront, and in some places floodgates that can be open and closed to help keep high tide and storm runoff from swamping properties. And this is a very costly plan as it's currently outlined, anywhere from $100 million to up to $215 million, depending on which choices are selected. It's a very long plan. You can read it at our website. You can find it at our website, .news.com, get familiar with it. But a very impressive document, I have to say, from city leadership.
We should say finally, Bill, if people want to get more news, more details about what we've been covering here, how can they find that online?
You can go online to the reporter's website, which is .news.com, and you can follow us on Twitter as well, @.news.
Thank you very much once again for taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Chris.
It was Bill Forry from the Dorchester Reporter.